today's episode, we're going to be discussing General Vallely's Patriot Guard concept to augment local law enforcement agencies. However, before we dive into that topic, here is today's conflicted question of the day. Stick with us to the very end, and myself and the rest of the panel will answer this question at the end of the video. We'd like to see your answers down below in the comment section. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela declared war against the United States due to the death of the dollar, which led to a complete collapse of the global monetary system. They blame the U.S. government for ruining the global financial markets and are using propaganda to get the support of their own people. Your country's president has gone on TV and declared that there are rough times ahead and that all citizens need to prepare for World War III. What would you do after hearing that? Again, we want to see your answers down below in the description. Couple quick housekeeping items. This video is brought to you by Black Forest Supplements. This is their NMN product here, which is an anti-aging product, but more important, an energy product. I've been taking this stuff now for well over 6 months. I've stopped a couple times, see what the effects were like, and amazing difference in my energy level when I take these. And it works so good that Big Pharma is lobbying the FDA to make this illegal and to be a pharmaceutical prescription drug only, which kind of tells you everything you need to know. If you want to increase your energy levels, click the link down below for Black Forest. Buy 2, get 1 free with our link. Seriously, I've taken every OTC over-the-counter supplement you can think of over the past 40 some odd years of weight training. This is the only one that has had really distinct, tangible improvements. The other thing that we got going on down below is Goldco. So if you click the link, you get a free wealth kit. Basically advises you how to navigate what is certainly some uncertain economic times ahead of us. Pretty interesting. I won't profess to be a finance guy, but what I will profess to is that when I read through it, I thought to myself, man, that makes a lot of sense. What a great way to prep for economic survival for your household. All right. Tomorrow evening, we will have a live episode of Survival Dispatch News, topic to be determined as we get closer to it. Friday, we will have a pre-recorded episode of Survival Dispatch News on the brainwashing of our children and what we can do about it. All of our videos, 7 p.m. Eastern time, across the board. Doesn't matter if it's live, pre-recorded, or what the platform is. And one last thing, if you go to patreon.com/survival dispatch or click the link down below and sign up for our Patreon, you get behind the scenes content, early access to content. You get our 228-page survival guide for only, well, you get it for free when you sign up for $9.99 a month as one of our insider members. If you don't sign up as a paid insider member, we still have free memberships. Easily 50% of the content that we put up there is free, doesn't cost you a penny. But if you'd like to support Survival Dispatch, which we appreciate very much, $9.99 a month, pretty good bang for the buck. That's it for the housekeeping. Let's get going on the Patriot Guards.
Well, thank you, Chris. Happy to be with you again. I want to discuss right now the formation and the concept of the Patriot Guards of America. Several years ago, many of us that I'm associated with here in Montana got very concerned about Antifa, Black Lives Matter, criminal gangs. This is before we really started getting the total influx of illegal border crossers. And it was mainly from what happened in Minnesota, 2020 and so on, where many of the businesses were criminalized, they were burned down, they were attacked by Antifa, Black Lives Matter, that had been infiltrated in a number of cities across America. And in 2020, we saw that crime raise across America with what was happening after the election. So when you put all these things together and you look at the threat there that's emanating from U.S. citizens, primarily at that time, that were funded by George Soros and others to conduct these riots and burning businesses and so on. And so we had a meeting in Montana and we were looking and said, well, what about the militias? Well, we looked around and there weren't any really organized the militias under the Constitution anywhere that were organized and had the capability to reinforce or help our sheriff and local police out. And of course, we're pretty safe here in Montana, but we saw now the rise of that over the past 4 years, 3.5 plus 4 years, whatever, that has now been really illustrated to the American people or laid out to the American people what we've seen in San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York, and now augmented with these new gangs coming into the country. So we looked at that time 2 years ago, how can we form something at the local level, the county level, that can work with the sheriffs and the local police to augment them? Because during this process, what did you have? The dismantling of our police, the defunding of the police, which was brought about by these left-wing politicians that wanted to defund the police around the country and put the budget money elsewhere. And of course, you've seen what's happened. It's been a gradual, in many areas, but a more severe effect on the police and doing their job. New York's a good example. Chicago's a good example. So we have a continuation of a lot of young Americans getting killed. We have a lot of young Americans, primarily minority, blacks, even some Latinos, getting involved in these gangs that would then rush these department stores and pharmacies, drugstores, and stealing and then reselling it on the street. And so crime just went really unbridled since that's all happened. And so 2 years ago, we said, well, let's form a local group and let's call it the Patriot Guards of America. And for leaders within your community to organize that Patriot Guard then with a number of retired police, retired Army, Special Forces, SEALs, people that have had instruction already, knew the use and understood the use of firearms, that could work with and augment the local sheriffs and police departments. And so that's what the Patriot Guard of America is all about, the concept. Now, the problem has been that I get from across the country, we don't have people in the counties that will take charge and to form organized groups that can work with the sheriffs. It seems like they want to sit back and wait for something to happen, then maybe we'll do something. No, you got to be prepared ahead of time, especially now as we're nearing a critical election in another month here in November, where we'll probably see whatever happens, riots, demonstrations, pilfering, burglary, and so on.
S2, did you want to throw a comment in there?
Yeah, I did. At least where I am, we're not seeing those same kinds of problems. There's lots of people that want to step up and take leadership. There's lots of people that want to do things like this. The big problem that we have right now is that nobody wants to stand alone, and understandably. You put a target on your back when you step up alone. You have to have your groups already formed when you decide to make an emergence into the public eye with something like this. The second problem we have is funding. We're basically, where you have groups like this, they're self-funded. They're not getting any help from the public at this point in time to acquire the necessary equipment to take on these responsibilities when you form a group like this. So that raises the next question is, where does your funding come from for something like a Patriot Guard? So I just wanted to throw those couple things in there.
Yeah, valid comments. Let's go back to the general and then we'll stop here another minute or so and carry on the conversation.
Government agencies have been weaponized against us. The Secret Service reacts too late. The FBI manufactures cases. The ATF targets our firearms, and the FDA screws us to drive big pharma profits. We must support Trump, who literally took a bullet for us, and back independent media like Survival Dispatch News. Now they're aiming to make Black Forest NMN a regulated anti-aging product to drive more profits for big pharma. NMN is the only over-the-counter supplement I've taken that's noticeably increased my energy levels, allowing me to work extreme hours. I've taken almost every OTC supplement over the past 42 years that I've been training, many of them as a world champion powerlifter. Get your NMN before it's too late. Buy 2, get 1 free. Click the link below. Stay alert, stay strong, and stay safe.
So what we're saying at the county level, if you're not prepared, it's going to be brutal. And the sheriffs and the police don't have the force now to be able to handle the onslaught of these riots and demonstrations and protests. Believe me, they'll be stealing everything they can out of the stores, food, pharmacy. They'll even steal vehicles and so on. And we're not prepared for that, Chris. Even though we've been working on it for 2 years, written articles about it, many radio, TV, interviews where we've discussed the Patriot Guard. But I talked to a gentleman, a retired Special Forces officer back in Pennsylvania, in Gettysburg, and he said, I can't get any interest for anybody to do anything. So there's a lackadaisical attitude out there about taking charge and preparing yourself. And as you know, the sheriffs can deputize as many people as they want to. And they don't have to pay them because they're volunteers who come and will stand for their communities and work with the police and the sheriffs. It's not a counter what they're doing. And then we're also worried about the overreach of the federal government. Martial law. You know, I mean, that's in the game plan of the left-wing communists.
Yeah, even though
populations get out of control, declare martial law, then they can arrest anybody they want to. Now, are we going to be prepared for that overreach of the federal government, the FBI, the military? Will the military stand with the people, or will they stand with a illegitimate White House that is breaking the law intentionally in order to overturn an election? So all of those things are out there.
Well, it's interesting, if you do a word search through the Constitution, nowhere does it say anything with regards to martial law. It is not codified in our Constitution. So I understand what you're saying. I agree with you that these bad guys, stolen from Jeff Emde, by the way, guys, the Soros funded groups, Obama will absolutely pursue something like martial law, and they'll give some, BS reason to their followers and supporters why they're entitled to do this, that they have this law behind them, but doesn't exist in the Constitution. They do not have that. It's like 2008 all over again. The best way to protect your savings is with gold and silver. As the national debt soars past $34 trillion and the banking system wobbles, your financial well-being could be at risk. Precious metals like gold and silver hedge against inflation and dollar devaluation. They're perfect for diversifying your portfolio. With Goldco, it's easy. Get first-class service, step-by-step guidance, and a free wealth protection kit. In just 3 simple steps, you can roll over your 401k or IRA into precious metals, tax and penalty free. Todd Callender and I chose Goldco because they stand out with over 6,000 5-star ratings, an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, and a highest buyback price guarantee. Don't wait. Secure your financial future. Visit survival.gold or click the link below to get your free 2024 wealth protection kit. I think that's a good spot to break and discuss this. So, Jeff, before we hit record, you came up with a slightly different wording for these types of groups as opposed to Patriot Guard or militia. My take on it is that thanks to Christopher Wray and the feds in general, Patriot and militia are now 4-letter words, essentially.
Yeah, they have negative connotations. And to a large part of the public, they do too, because you've got the mainstream media and the government saying, oh, they're bad people, even though historically the militias are what fought the British. in the American Revolution. It was, Lexington and Concord, those were local militias.
So what was the wording again that you came up with?
I came up with civilian auxiliary.
So interesting choice of words. I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but my process has been the same for years when it comes to business development stuff and developing copy, all that sort of stuff. So I go to a big whiteboard, I write everything down that comes to mind, I walk away. I come back, it might be 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days later, and I wipe off all the bad stuff. And then I walk away and I come back 10 minutes, 10 days, whatever later. I wipe off all the good stuff. And then I walk away and I come back, and all that's left is the best stuff. And then I try to substitute words with power words, the 170 some odd words that evoke emotion, which is limbic brain. Limbic brain's where you make all your decisions. When you say to somebody, hey, why did you do this thing? And they say, well, because it felt like the right thing to do. That's the limbic brain on display. And my point is that if you can take a whole whiteboard and condense, 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 and get it down to the point where you can very quickly communicate what the purpose is, what the value proposition is, you're more likely to capture somebody's attention and get them to invest more time in listening to whatever you have to say. So with Patriot and militia both being four-letter words with, as you said, negative connotations, the general's idea was that you would have these local groups of private citizens that would be on call and able to augment local police resources, right? But it doesn't say that in Patriot Guard. That doesn't say, to me, I'm not connecting those dots. So the civilian auxiliary that you came up with is kind of my process with the whiteboard of how do you crunch this stuff down and say, here it is, easy to understand terms. Civilian auxiliary is very easy to understand. And I think that's
civilian is not threatening. Oh, just civilian people, just normal civilians out there, because the base word of civilian is civil. So you don't think of, you really don't think of violence and all that kind of stuff. It's, it's civilian, it's civil. And then the auxiliary is help. You're just augmenting, you're the help. You're not taking over, you're not doing their job, you're just helping them. And I think the role of it should be, the stated role would be, in the event of a crisis, backfill in the less crucial roles, the police and the sheriff's department, so that they can go handle, they handle the riot, and then the civilian auxiliary takes over, maybe patrolling their neighborhoods to make sure there's no looting and that kind of thing. So you free up, it's almost like you free up the frontline troops to go fight, and then you're in the back and you're the one who's driving the trucks and cooking the meals and that kind of thing, in a military sense, to free up your shock troops to go out and do the fight.
very well said. S2, just give me a minute, and I want to come to you next, S2. I've got specific questions for you, but I want to get a couple things out of the way first and foremost. Number one, Sheriff Richard Jones, Butler County, Ohio, when he returned from the annual sheriff's meeting with the FBI earlier this year, and Christopher Wray had announced that, all the lights are going off, there's imminent terrorist attacks going to happen, blah, blah, blah. He went out and deputized somewhere around 36 citizens in Butler County, Ohio. And then he spent over $100,000 on getting them trained. And the latest news I have on that, apparently he's looking for the second batch of 36 or so. And I know S2 has got some stuff to say on funding, because it's really important. And I'm going to go to you for that in like 1 second, S2. But I got a question for you all before we go there. When Jeff said the civilian auxiliary, am I the only person who can hear Gomer Pyle in my head saying, citizens rest, citizens rest?
That's a very real thing.
It is. And I just dated all three of us, but either way, I grew up on the Andy Griffith Show. I love that guy. So
I watch it every morning.
Right. God bless you. But I mean, better times indeed. So S2, go ahead and start wherever you want, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on the funding piece, because the general even mentioned you know, that in his words, the Patriot Guard, in Jeff's words, the civilian auxiliary would not be paid, would not be any type of burden on the system. But look at what, Sheriff Richard Jones did. So go ahead, S2.
So I'm going to take a couple steps back here and say that the word Patriot Guard, while symbolic in its meaning, is probably meant to be used in a more uh, friendlier time. So everything is about time at this point. And right now, we are not in a time where the words Patriot Guard, I think, would be very well accepted. It would actually probably repel some of the people that would be willing to partake in this. So Jeff's idea of civilian auxiliary, yeah, it gives a little bit more of a docile feel to it, if you will. As far as funding goes, there are people in states out there that are trying to do things along the same lines, but they're calling them state guards. And one particular gentleman I know of, he has the adjunct general's ear in the National Guard. And he wants to put something in front of him that would be an auxiliary for the National Guard. However, the stipulation would be that the state has to fund those chapters or organizations where they might be, and they don't answer to the federal government because they are civilian based auxiliaries to the National Guard. So that's one source of it. The other source of it would be from the public. And that's everybody is a little short of a few dollars these days. So in times like this, it would be hard to get that kind of funding coming from the public. But if you're going to implement something like this, you have to be able to you can equip yourself to a certain extent, but there are things that you're going to need that are very high ticket items. I mean, let's talk about night vision or thermal goggles right now. I mean, those things are running anywhere between $10,000 and $40,000 a pop. So how do you get those? That's the question.
I actually meant to make a comment on that last night, Jeff, when we had Major Jeffrey Prather on. And of course, S2, you've worked with him as well. And I can't remember his exact comment, Jeff, but he said something with regards to Russian night vision.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it made me laugh.
It was talking about the cartel people down on the border.
Yeah, the reason it made me laugh is this is a Russian equivalent to a PVS-14. The performance is good. I can't tell any difference between this and American companies, but you'll get a kick out of this. The entire mounting mechanism is non-standard. It's not the regular J channel, J hook or anything like that. And when you try to hook on the cables on the side so that it stops it from getting ripped off your head if you hit a branch or something like that, they don't work because this whole mechanism's so clunky. It kind of reminds me of typical Russian engineering,
Bungee straps around an SKS for mounting a scope.
Yeah, I've got
just like that, but different.
I've got a pair of cheap Russian Gen 1 night vision binoculars, and got them 20 years ago, and my wife gave it to me as a birthday present or something, and they were okay, but yeah, I mean, you can do better with a handheld video camera with night vision on it, or an iPhone with night vision on it. Yeah. I've got these little cheap cameras around my house that are night vision, and they actually are really good, but I think they're $20.
So since we're on this topic, and we don't get anything for this, it's not like we get an affiliate commission or anything, but these NVGs were on a Kickstarter earlier this year for $189. And now I believe they're $239. And we did a shootout of this guy versus a product that was about $100. Another one was like $1,000. And this is color night vision. And even with the IR flood turned off on this, the resolution is crazy good. And there's some people out there who've made quarter 20 mounts to put this on a helmet. I can't imagine putting this thing on a helmet, but even if you were okay with the weight of this being on your helmet, it's a digitally rendered product. So it has latency, right? Like every time if you move that fast, it takes a minute for the picture to regenerate itself because it's not in the glass like high quality night vision. So I wouldn't use this for CQB stuff or anything like that. But your idea, so I was thinking to myself, you've got your civilian auxiliary, and if you're talking as far as infrastructure here, neighborhood watch, civilian auxiliary, city PD, sheriff's office sort of thing is the layers. And if you are on that neighborhood watch or you're part of the citizens auxiliary, something like this is not for battle, but man, you can see a long ways in high resolution with something like this.
You're
Well,
just
yeah,
patrolling
and
the
to your
neighborhood.
and to your point, Major Jeffrey Prather's concept of Team America kind of boils down to exactly this.
Okay.
However, we're not relying on law enforcement because at the end of the day, I think in a catastrophic situation, that if the police or the sheriffs get overrun, they're going to go back and they're going to take care of their families back in their neighborhoods. So we would form our own neighborhood watches, our own groups within those groups, and then your various neighborhoods would come together in defense as a larger force. So where you basically have what we might call sleeper cells that get activated in times of catastrophe. We say, okay, we're guarding our own neighborhood, we're securing our own neighborhood, but the tribe across the way over there, we're going to join forces with them to coming up against a common enemy. And that's when I think you might start seeing a lot of people come out of the woodwork, including law enforcement, and say, whew, the cavalry's here, so to speak. But that's kind of the same concept of what I think the general's getting at here.
Well, and another aspect of that is if I'm a police officer or sheriff's deputy or whatever, if I know there is an auxiliary behind me keeping my neighborhood and my family safe, I'm not going to necessarily feel the need to leave my post to make sure my wife and kids are okay. If I know, hey, Bob, my neighbor Bob, and the other guys, they've got this. The neighborhood is secure. So I can go do my job without that nagging in the back of my head. And it makes me more effective as a police officer.
So let me ask you a question, Jeff. I think I believe Major pointed this out last night. The kill. We're in basically a Cold War right now, and we know everybody here knows we're in a Cold War. But where we're in a Cold War, we don't know who the enemies are because they're not wearing uniforms. But the killing has already started. It's been going on. So just like they're not wearing uniforms, we have people that are wearing uniforms that don't necessarily play for the blue side.
True.
If you will. So that's where we need to start engaging with our police departments and our sheriff's departments on one-on-one conversations with the deputies and the officers that are actually out on the street, because those are the guys that can basically give us the intel that we need to be able to know what we need to do in any given instant. And for us to say, okay, if we know who you are, we know you personally, we know where you live, that's not a threat. That's saying, I got your back. That's the message that needs to be conveyed.
Yeah. And I think if you set up neighborhood groups, then if there's someone from outside the group that comes into your neighborhood, maybe a bad actor, you'll be able to identify him because it's one of those, he wasn't at the meeting. Who's this guy?
I see them all the time walking through my neighborhood, people that don't belong here all the time. And I'm always constantly looking and I'm like, yeah, never seen you before.
Yeah. And I've had one, I've had to call the cops. I followed the kid and he went up the hill and went across through the desert and actually broke into the back window of a house. So I called the police. Well, it turned out the kid lived there and it was shorter for him to cut through the desert and climb in through the back window because that's the only way he could get in the house because he'd lost his key. But and I called the sheriffs and they came out but they and when it turned out to be nothing, they were like, "Good on you, man. Better to have a false alarm."
I've caught cars going through this neighborhood with no plates on them that were stealing mail out of people's mailboxes.
Yeah.
True story. There's a gentleman at the entrance to our subdivision He's retired. His wife's still working. She's a nurse. And he had all of these Donald Trump things out in his yard a few years ago. Uh, Everything from signs to statues, et cetera, et cetera. And he's walking to the mailbox one day, and we've got the best mail carrier ever. Susan's awesome. She says, "Gee, I'm sorry to see you all go, Jerry." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "Well, we got your forward address to send all of your mail back to Ohio." And Jerry's like, "Born and raised here in Florida. I'm not from Ohio. What are you talking about?" So she ends up getting with him the next day and said, "Here it is. We got this official request to send all your mail to Ohio. You know, all I've had for the past couple of weeks for you guys is junk mail, in case you haven't noticed." So lo and behold, at the same time, a handwritten note shows up in his mailbox that says, "I never thought we would have you crazy Trump supporters in our neighborhood, and you're a threat to democracy. And look at what your people did on January the 6th." This great big long message, but the handwriting was something we would expect to see from our parents and grandparents when cursive was a thing, right? So what does Jerry do? He takes it to a local sign shop and has them blow it up on a 4x8 sheet of plywood that's all painted, and it's got the actual handwriting, like they used an image to do it, puts it in his front yard. The city shows up and says, "You're not allowed to have signs that large in your yard, residential neighborhood. And if you don't take it down, I'm going to fine you $500. And Jerry's pretty well off. And Jerry's like, "Yeah, okay, I'll pay you the $500 fine. But what happens after that?" And the guy says, "Listen, I agree with what you're doing here. But what happens after that is it's going to go to a local justice of the peace, judge. And if you get the wrong one, there's all these fines that could be levied against you, and there's no guarantee." So Jerry begrudgingly took it down because he didn't want to get into a big legal battle and everything. It turned out to be the old bat living in the house beside him. And she got turned into the cops. She got charged. She got convicted. I don't think she did any jail time. She was like 78, 79 years old. But it just really tells you how deep that division is in our society, number one. And to S2's point, you wouldn't look at her and think, "Well, that's my enemy." You know what I mean? Like, nobody's looking at a 78-year-old lady saying, "Oh, that's the enemy there. We need to, do something about her," sort of thing. But anyway, let's listen to the general answer the next question, and then we will resume our discussion. Question for you, General. What has the reception been from any conversations that people have had with their local PD or local sheriff's office with regards to organizing like this? Has it been, warm, not so warm, neutral? Just curious how they've.
Fuzzy, very, very fuzzy. Again, America, we don't have the patriotism that we used to have. When you look back when I grew up in the 40s and 50s. And the problem is everybody assumes somebody else is going to take care of it. Somebody else is going to protect us. Well, boy, when you don't have the food on the shelves of the stores and you have internal threats that will be supported by an external force, for example, the cartels, the Chinese. We know 30 to 40,000 Chinese have come across our border. And we know that they'll use the Club K system to bring containers into the country that will have arms in them, explosives, communication, whatever, under the Club K. If you can call that up sometime, you can see the type of containers they have where the top comes up, a missile comes out, a rocket, whatever. They can store anything in those. And most of them aren't being checked, as we know, right now. And so we have external threats, internal threats. And America, if you're not going to be ready here in the next 30 days, I don't know what's going to happen. If Trump's elected, that's going to be very good and very positive, but he will have to take steps immediately to quell any riots or demonstrations that come from these groups that are trying to dismantle America. And that's what I don't know whether you got my new book, but I'll show it to you. But we put everything in there, Chris,
I have it.
about the dismantling of America.
I have it.
Okay. And that's what they're intending to do. Global government, top down. The hell with the people. Look what's happening in North Carolina. We can't even execute a rescue operation in 24 hours to save our own people, but yet they did it in 48 hours when Haiti had all those problems. They called up the 82nd Airborne Division. That brings up a whole nother topic if you want to discuss that.
Well, yeah, I think it's still germane to the conversation. I think what we're seeing in North Carolina is a conscious decision on the part of the, Biden / Obama / Harris admin to not help a large segment of North Carolina who don't support them. They support Donald Trump, and there was something like 12,000 votes after they cheated. 12,000 votes was the separation between, good and bad in the last election. So if they can take out the whole western part of North Carolina and not allow them to vote because they're not going to help them in any way, shape, or form to have shelter, food, water, all the basics, it's very dirty and underhanded, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it goes even beyond that, Chris. They're totally incapable of leading.
Yes.
There's no leadership. No one's running the White House now other than Obama from his mansion in Colorado, mile and a half from the White House. There's nobody in charge. Now, here's the point. Here you have, and I've served with the 82nd Airborne. I know Fort Bragg, North Carolina, very well. They have a go company, for example, that's always on duty. You can call them up 24 hours, they're gone. Same way with a battalion, a brigade.
Just a quick comment. At one point in time, the general was the commanding officer at the 82nd Airborne, even though he didn't mention it there.
They have helicopter units, medical units. They have these packaged all ready to go and do something. They have the aircraft there. Now, if I'm a major general commanding the 82nd or the 18th Airborne Corps, which is commanded by a 3-star, if I have a situation in our country, in North Carolina, where we've had these massive floods due to the hurricane, and they need help. People are dying, they're missing food, water. Then if I have a non-operational chain of command up through FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, and the White House, and they're not reacting to save the people, then the damn generals need to take action. I mean, if you're out on a ship and you're getting cascaded by attacks, and you can't get through to the White House, or you can't get through whatever, they're not operational, then that captain of that ship is authorized, that admiral's authorized to do what they have to protect the ship. Well, it's the same thing in the States. Where in the hell is the National Guard? They have helicopters, they have medical people in North Carolina. South Carolina could have helped, Georgia could have helped, others. But you see how dysfunctional everything is now, from the top down federal government to many of the states. And the fact that the military, these generals and admirals, are so woke, they're probably afraid they'll get demoted or discharged or thrown out of the armed forces if they take action on their own. But that's what the hell we pay these generals and admirals to do.
S2.
I'll tell you where the National Guard was and all of that. Roy Cooper was sitting on his hands in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the governor's mansion, waiting on permission from Biden to be able to deploy the National Guard. That's where he was.
Does North Carolina have a state guard too, S2?
No,
Okay.
National Guard. In fact, they're trying to they've been trying to introduce language and legislation to outlaw militias here. So we're talking about Patriot Guard. That's going to be something of, like I said, in this current environment, is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
have a question. Does the governor need the president's approval to mobilize their National Guard?
Well, for some reason, the impression has been in the last couple of years that the executive branch up in D.C. controls all of the National Guard.
All right.
Whether that's and that's not true.
No, but here's my other.
because
Here's my
because he
second
had
part.
no problem. He had no problem deploying the National Guard during COVID.
Yeah, well, now here's my second part. What can the president do to a governor if the governor mobilizes his National Guard and the president tells him not to? What can he do to him? Is he going to arrest him? He's an elected official. He's the highest ranking official in that state. I cannot imagine that the FBI would go arrest Greg Abbott in Texas, or even try to arrest Greg Abbott in Texas, because they're Texas Rangers and the Texas Highway Patrol would probably sit there with guns and say, "Yeah, no, you're not."
You're right,
Oh,
but Obama's a chicken shit who operates in the shadows, always has and always will. So I, with confidence, would say, what are they going to do? They would cut off every source of funding they possibly could to make life miserable for that governor and his constituents. That's what Obama would do. That's his whole thing.
That's in the future, but I tell you what, you get those people rescued right then.
Fair enough.
So just to add this on here, it's been proven. There is lots of evidence out there that Cooper is tied in with the Chinese Communist Party.
Wow.
He's been rubbing hands with agents of the Chinese Communist Party right here in North Carolina. So he's with the program, so to speak.
So let me just throw something out there before we go back to the general. As far as national organizations are concerned, and because you mentioned National Guard, I made a note in our last segment where we paused the general that my opinion is, so I agree with what you were saying as to at the grassroots level, like you've got to have these conversations in small groups, one-on-one, whatever the case may be. But in the big picture, I think if you had a national level organization, whether they're existing or new, that had credibility, that could roll up a civilian auxiliary underneath of it, would probably get you a whole lot further as far as going to local authorities and saying, hey, we're here from the civilian auxiliary, we're at your disposal, blah, blah, blah. But again, if there was a national organization umbrella that they fell under that had credibility, wasn't perceived as militia, I think it would be an easier sell. And you're going to see some of the conversation between the general and I, where I asked him for what's the SOP, and you'll hear his answer here shortly. Suffice it to say, there really isn't an SOP. And I personally feel like if you're going to approach the local cops, authorities, you should probably have an SOP that will give you predictable and repeatable results, and not some sort of ad hoc process. Do either of you want to comment on that before we go back to the general?
Yeah, I think that the more organized or the more defined your mission is from the get-go, and in a lot of ways, the more limited it is, so that they don't think that you're a threat to their authority, would be better and be easier to swallow. But yeah, if you could do it like under, I'm just pulling this out of my ass, but like the American Legion, a group that's been around for freaking 100 years. Maybe you redefine who can be in the American Legion. Like the VFW, you got to be a veteran of a foreign war. But if you just had a group that says, yeah, we're taking a lot of former military, but not limited to former military. You got former law enforcement, whoever, and say, and we are here to back up our public officials, our public, our law enforcement, when in ways that frees them up to do their mission, and we do the little stuff so they can do the big stuff, kind of thing. And I think if you had it wrapped up in the American Legion or something like that, because everybody said, well, my grandpa was in the American Legion. Yeah, okay, they're harmless, but they're also patriotic.
Yeah, good point. Here's a question, and I don't know if anybody will have an answer or not, but I'm thinking back to when I was growing up. We had 3 channels, lived in the middle of nowhere. So Sunday evening, 60 Minutes after football was done, seeing the Guardian Angels appear on 60 Minutes back when it was a real, news organization back in the day. We're talking late 70s, early 80s. Do either of you have any idea how the Guardian Angels came to be and what their communication was with the NYPD and the authorities? I don't know. I'm just saying, is there something you could replicate there to kind of pave the way for smooth, cooperation?
So I remember that. I remember actually reading a lot about the Guardian Angels, and the founder of the group, basically how they came to be was the crime had gotten so bad where he was living that he decided he wanted to do something about it, and basically was creating the neighborhood watch type situation. It eventually evolved into something a little stronger than that, and you've seen this happen recently, in fact, where I think it was in Chicago, where you had a group of black men that kind of in the same boat decided that they didn't want to they wanted to get this crime out of their area, so they came together and they started carrying guns on the street, and it seems to have worked. It got a lot of media attention, but their communication with the New York Police Department, the Guardian Angels, that is, I believe, started with the founder. He went to them. He didn't ask permission. He told them, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm not your enemy, but I do need to communicate with you when things go south." And I think they just kind of accepted that because he was a community leader and nobody was going to say, "No, you can't do this."
It was Curtis Sliwa, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, when I wrote that question down on my pad, I thought to myself, we'll probably won't have an answer to the Guardian Angels, but you guys did great. Thank you.
No, you don't need
Appreciate the
permission.
input.
You don't need permission to form a neighborhood watch, but you
No.
do need to liaison with your police departments to let them know that we're not a band of marauders walking around the neighborhood harassing people.
No, and that's
And
what I was getting at is how do you take that liaison model and apply it on a national scale without being interpreted as militia is what I was getting at.
Well,
Yeah, and the thing-
I would say it's the same way you would do it with a military operation. So one of the things that I know Special Forces did when they went into Afghanistan is they would go to the tribal leaders in the various different provinces, and they would gain rapport with those tribal leaders and communicate with them. And Special Forces knew that now some of the tribes maybe didn't get along all the time with each other, but the one thing they did know was that if it came down to it, they would mobilize as a front against a common enemy, just like I said before. So that's kind of the way I see things going at this point. If things don't go well for this election, is I think the country's probably going to go tribal, and that's exactly what you're going to see. But how you liaise with that is you generally, at least up until recently, we used to have cars that would come and patrol your neighborhood, police cars, and they would come through your neighborhood. So you find out who those guys are, and you say, "Hey, this is Joe, this is Sam, this is Albert, and we're neighborhood watch here. We just want to let you know." And you have some sort of identification. Maybe it's a yellow vest, maybe it's an orange vest, maybe it's a blue vest, but you have some sort of identification that lets them know who you are. So that way they're aware of you.
Yeah,
Good
because
point.
Just like
don't wear
just
high visibility clothing on purpose.
Well, it was just like the Curtis Slowell did. Their
Yeah.
symbol was the red beret with their little pin on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they also had the advantage that they weren't armed. Of course, they couldn't be armed because of New York's laws. But
True.
that also, the police knew, okay, that's those guys. They may travel in a group of 5 or 6 for their own safety, because a lot of the thugs would target them if they're on their own. But they knew, okay, they're not going to pull a gun out and shoot at us. So they knew what they had there.
I was looking for a picture on my phone, and I guess I don't have time to find it. But when we did the video, Cindy and I did the video on those night vision goggles. We've got an abandoned golf course here, and we were on it, and she was 600 yards or so away from me, kind of around a side of a dog leg. And we've got an asshole neighbor lives down the street, started cussing her out because his dogs were chasing Cindy, and Cindy's really proficient with dogs. And he was cussing up a storm. It's a good thing I wasn't there. I'd probably still be in jail. But the cops he called the cops on us and said that we were vandalizing the golf course. And
What an asshole.
when the cop showed up, I was like, "No, hey, come on over here, check this out." And I had all these night vision things set up and everything. And I said, "How many illuminators, IR illuminators, do you guys have on?" And they both looked at me and they were like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Well, here, you stay there. You come back over here." They had half a dozen IR illuminators on their vest going off. And they claim that they weren't aware of that, but it's the first time I've seen that on city PD with, nighttime IR illuminators, which you typically see on, military teams, right? So they could be identified from the air and picked up and rescued. But anyway, we gained 2 new followers for Survival Dispatch.
I watched that video. I laughed at the end there.
Yeah, it went over well. So let me go back to the general here and we'll take a listen to his follow-up points here.
Got to be on the side of the American people, whatever the situation may be. So if they had an unoperational, dysfunctional chain of command, then at Fort Bragg, they should have used their initiative, send out the medics, send out the helicopters, send out the food, send out whatever they can, because they've got the helicopters on duty and they're already getting paid. It's not like you need more money, right? Everybody at Fort Bragg's on the payroll. They already have the petrol there. They've got the food supplies. It's not like you have to go through Congress and requisition a whole bunch more money. And when Mayorkas, that traitor, came out and said, we've used all of our funds, we don't have any. Right. My God, that's treason right there. Of course, he's in our book. He's the first one that should go to jail or whatever for treason to this country.
Well, number one, yeah. How can you be out of money if the federal government's fiscal year just started?
And they're still getting taxes every day. The IRS gets money every day from the American people, for companies, corporations, everybody, right? Everybody's paying taxes all the time, whatever it is. So it's all BS that they don't have the money.
Well, my personal opinion.
Yet they had $1 billion plus for the illegals. Put them up in hotels, food, cell phones, cash, whatever. And we can't support our own people. That is such a lie.
Well,
that's how dysfunctional this government is in Washington, D.C. now.
The only way that I can reconcile all of this stuff happening is I have to conclude that our government is under direct enemy control. There's no other explanation for it. Nobody who is loyal to America, who's a proud patriotic American, would be making these decisions. Nobody who's a proud American would say, well, we're not going to help our own people in North Carolina, but we'll give away billions of dollars to illegals. There's no explanation for it, like I say, other than the fact that our government is under direct influence and control of our enemies, whether it be China, George
and our Manchurian candidate. Yeah. Our Manchurian candidate is Obama, the
Correct.
Total fraud, the total manipulator.
I could not
treason in every regard, but yet he's got a force there.
Yeah,
Chris, he's got a force. He's got an organization, puppeteers controlling everything that's going on, and then he's controlled by the globalists.
Tell me that the general is not a national treasure, by the way. Right. So I have your book, The Dismantling of America. I've only got partway through it right now. Here's my question, next question at least. Do you have an SOP defined that somebody could take in their county to get a Patriot Guard off the ground, so that there's actual steps they can get their head wrapped around? We need to do X, Y, and Z to make this happen. Is there anything like that either in the book or Stand Up America or any other white papers you've written?
Well, we have the white paper, which is 4 pages. It describes what they need to do and in part how to do it. But it's not that difficult, Chris. Geez, if you have turmoil in your town or something, geez, just call some people, key people in your community to get together and have a meeting, get organized. You don't need an SOP or a doctrine or anything to do that, for God's sakes. Organize. That's the key. Leadership, organization. And then make sure that you can, in fact, work with the sheriffs or the police and association. And a lot of these sheriffs, as you know, they're so damn political.
Yes.
And they don't want to make any major decisions either. They're afraid they're going to get fired or they won't keep their job. That's this mental attitude in America, rather than taking charge and protecting the people. That's what we've lost in many of the states.
So the reason I asked if there
Yeah.
was an SOP is because a lot of people amongst us,
Yeah.
they need something to follow, if you get what I mean. Like, we stop.
No, but that's an excuse.
Well, it may be, but I want to just tie it to the educational system for a minute. And you've been a witness to this. At some point in time, I want to say either in the 70s or 80s, we shifted away from teaching American students problem solving skills, critical thinking, for lack of a better term. And since then, what we've taught them to do is memorize and regurgitate. And so keeping that in mind, I get what you're saying. I don't personally need an SOP to get going on this, to get people organized. I can handle that. But your average person has been taught to memorize, regurgitate, as opposed to problem solve. And that's why I asked about an SOP, because I've had many employees over many years, and very few of them could take the initiative on their own to do something without already running it by me or somebody else. But if you give them an SOP, they'll beat the heck out of it.
Gotcha, yeah.
As long as they understand it. So I get what you're saying. The problem is it goes back to probably the formation of the Department of Education and the watering down of curricula and what we've spit out today.
But those aren't the people, Chris, those aren't the people that are going to organize, though. They're going to be the sheep.
They are, but I
You
think
have the leaders in the community. Take a retired colonel, retired major, captain, NCO. Those are the people that have to take charge and lead. The younger people, like you're talking about, aren't going to do it. That's where strong leadership comes in, an organization. And it doesn't take an SOP for those people. They know how to do it. They've been there. They've been trained in the military, special ops, infantry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I understand 100% what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. On the business side of the equation, which is nowhere near as formal as the military side, the number one complaint for CEOs in America is that there's not enough hours in the day. And the number two complaint for CEOs in America is they don't have enough lieutenants that can carry out the work to the level that they expect it to be completed at. So how do you contend with that? Well, you have to build out systems. So systems would be the combination of people, processes, and technology, so that you can plug any monkey into the equation and get the same repeatable, predictable results. So I think in terms of scalability, we only have so many generals like you that are at your level. We only have so many, lieutenant colonels like Doc Pete. There's a finite number of people that have the spec ops training that you guys do, the military experience that you guys do. So it brings to the question, General, is how do you replicate and scale? In other words, how do you take a portion of your knowledge and experience and replicate it through other people? And that's when you get back to these systems. You got to have people, processes, and technology to be scalable. And I also wonder, just thinking out loud, if maybe some of the people haven't taken the initiatives to go to their sheriff because they have comfort in having some sort of SOP. Maybe we can call it something other than SOP, but the recipe. Let's call it the recipe for cooking something up that tastes good. I think people kind of have a herd mentality, right? They see other people succeed at something, then they fall in behind them. So maybe that's at play. All right, S2. I just wanted to kind of finish that thought before you weigh in with your comment.
So I agree with what you're saying there. I also agree with what the general says there. There's several aspects to that, or facets to that conversation. I've seen a lot of people in the organizations that I've been into that you've got people that want to stand up and take on that leadership, but when you step back and you've watched them for a while, you look at them and you say, yeah, no, you're not really capable of doing that, because I know what's going to happen to guys like you when the pressure gets put on. So, and we see this a lot in volunteer organizations. We see people step up into leadership. To some of them are just stepping up to get the ball rolling, and then they want to step back and let the thing go and get legs of its own. And maybe that is the key. Maybe you just got to find that one guy that wants to go out and start walking around banging on doors in his neighborhood and say, hey, you know, how are things going today, John? Oh, going pretty shitty because of the economy and everything. Well, that's how you find those guys to be part of that organization. You ask
Guerrilla marketing, essentially.
well, you ask baited questions to see where their mind is. This is a Marine Corps recon trick also, by the way. But that's what we do. We already know the answers to the questions that we're going to ask. We need to see the reactions to understand who's on our side. And to your point, yes, there are a lot of sheep out here, but there are also a lot of sheep out here that can be taught. And that's the big thing. A lot of these guys over in Afghanistan, wherever all of these wars have been, a lot of those guys were never war fighters. They were never what they would call freedom fighters. They didn't know which end of a Kalashnikov was the right one to shoot. So, but they had to be taught. And that was the reason for special forces going in, was to train those forces. And in a lot of the things that even I teach, I do the same thing. I am training the trainer, because I can't train everybody. I can't have eyes on everybody. When I have large classes of people come in, I take a couple of my students that are been with me for a long time, and I say, okay, you go work with this group over here, and you go work with this group over here. And I have essentially they've become my force multiplier in that way. And that's really what we have to start doing in our own communities, is become that force multiplier. But you've got to get that one guy that's willing to stand up, whether he's in it for the long term to be the leadership or whether he's in it for the short term. You got to find that one guy that's willing to step up. So in my opinion, anybody that's watching this cast, be that guy.
Fair enough. Jeff, your thoughts?
Well, I think the general is speaking like a general. That'd be like saying, how do I fly an airplane, and have Chuck Yeager say, well, you just get in and fly it, man. Well, yeah, easy for you to say. You're probably the greatest test pilot in the history of mankind. Because a lot of people who have not been in the military or even exposed to it don't have, or even haven't even seen that kind of leadership in action. You know, if you're you were a corporal and you had a really good, master sergeant, you can say, okay, I know how to do this. I'll just do what he did. But if you've never seen that, people need, having a plan in front of them is, it says, okay, you're going to need to do A, B, C, and D. And people can get behind that because they don't have the confidence or the experience to figure all that out for themselves. So you're kind of handing it to them. You don't toss a kid the keys and say, go drive. You say, okay, here's the clutch, here's the brake, here's the gas pedal, this is the shifter, and you walk them through it, and you start slow and you build up to it. You got to do the same thing with other people in other areas. But it's and the other part about having an SOP, for lack of a better word, is when you go to your sheriff or you go to your chief of police, you can hand it to them and say, this is what we want to do. This is how we envision doing it. We're willing to take on your advice, of course, but you're handing them something so they know the parameters of the program that they're going to have to sign off on. Because having a civilian auxiliary to your local police and the local police don't want it, isn't going to go over too well.
So you want an SOP? I'll give you an SOP. There's a guy named Joe Dolio that I know, that he created a series of books called Tactical Wisdom. And he's got one called Baseline Training Manual, Scouting and Patrolling, Defensive Operations, Fieldcraft, and he's got another one that he put out recently for medical. that's one area of that series of books that you can read to get an SOP. But if you really want to understand it from a civilian standpoint rather than military, I would suggest reading Clay Martin's book, Prairie Fire, because he goes through how to develop in a fictional way, but a factual way. He goes through how to develop that civilian force, if you will. Those are two very good sources.
Yeah, that's great. That's too well done. So I've been a business development guy for pretty much my entire career. And I've preached to clients for many, many years that you should never start a business until you have determined what your exit strategy is. 90% of businesses are defunct by year 5. So what I mean is there's only a handful of ways for you to end your business. So you retire and you shut it down. You bequeath it to your children or your family. Maybe you leave it for your employees. Bowling.com is, Daytona Beach, your largest bowling ball company in the world. The guy has no family. He left the company to all of his employees. Or ideally, you build value in your business and you sell it. However, most mid-market and small businesses have an owner or owners who have a Superman cape on, and they rescue the situation, good, bad, or otherwise, as time goes on. But if you take them out of the equation, there is no value in the business. So in order to build value in a business, you have to have systems in place where you get repeatable, predictable results. So I created this chart many, many years ago, definitions of different types of processes, right? So your initial processes, that's where you've got your Superman complex going on. Performance isn't repeatable. There's no organized processes. It's all ad hoc. If you're at that level and you own a business, it's not worth anything to sell it because of those reasons. And the next level up would be managed processes. So we've got some organized processes, we've got some repeatability, but we're not really all the way there. Defined is where a lot of the SMBs, small, medium businesses end up that are, not accidental in their success, but all of their processes are documented. The KPIs are documented. So key performance indicators, what we're measuring, what's measured gets done. They have very well-defined value chains, and everybody in the organization has a focus. Not too many companies get to the next level, so quantitatively managed, where performance is almost 100% predictable across the board, and you have targets and standards that deliver that. And as far as optimizing is concerned, at the very top, where your processes are almost like self-healing, I could tell you that I've encountered maybe a handful of businesses out of the many thousands that I've worked with over the years who get to that point. So business development lecture aside, it doesn't matter if it's a for-profit business, a nonprofit business, if you don't have your processes defined to deliver those predictable, repeatable results, you're not going to last in the long run. You'll be one of those companies who goes defunct in the first 5 years, or nonprofit that goes defunct. Sorry, go ahead.
But that's a product of maturity of the business itself. Some companies never get to that point of at the top level of maturity of that. They just decide, I've gotten to a certain level and I go away.
Yeah, but circle back to my original comment. If your plan is to build a business and sell it and retire, you have to be able to unplug yourself. You have to work yourself out of a job, and you have to show the ability that the business that you've built is a machine, and you can plug any monkey into the machine and get the same results. Now that's worth something. Now somebody's going to give you a multiplier on your EBITDA. And again, I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole and BDM related stuff, but suffice it to say that this type of organization, so somebody who's going to get traction on a national level with a citizens auxiliary, a Patriot Guard, there has to be all of these things have to be defined. Like Jeff said, Jeff made a great argument that you can go to the law enforcement and say, here's our charter, here's our processes, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, and this is how you can leverage us and lean on us, like Jeff said, to do the small stuff while you guys do the big stuff.
Well, and alternately, I would say you would also want to use a PACE plan too. You present them with your primary, but you have your alternate, your contingency, and your emergency that you keep in your back pocket, and you don't let anybody outside of your organization know what those last 3 legs are.
Yeah, no, fair enough. You're on mute, Jeff.
I think to get started, you almost, and again, look at a business model again. You got to have a marketing strategy for this. I mean, you've got to, because like I say, if the sheriffs and the police chiefs don't want to have anything to do with you, you're not going to be very successful. So you almost go to them and say, it's just like if you're going to market a product to a company, you've got to say, this is why buying our product helps your company. Yeah, I'm going to make money on it, but they're not going to buy my product because it makes me rich. They're going to want to buy my product because it improves their processes, it makes them money, it makes their employees more productive or something. So you need to go to these sheriffs and say, this is what we do, this is what we're proposing, and this is how it will help you for little or zero cost. And when you're gaining members for your auxiliary, you do the same thing. You say, this is what we're organizing. This is how we benefit our neighborhoods, our families, our communities benefit because we're providing stability at a time when there probably isn't stability, or we're going to provide security when those who normally do are off chasing bigger fish, because there's a riot downtown. We're going to be protecting our at home. And it's a marketing thing where you basically say, this is why you want to be involved in this. And you go to the sheriffs and say, this is why you want us out there to help you.
Can I give you a real life example? So you had the Major on last night. Major started Team America about 4 or 5 years ago. And as of now, there is a presence of his organization, Team America, in about 40 of the 50 states right now. And he has done a great job in marketing that. So that's exactly what you're talking about. Has it been easy to build that organization through personal interaction with the Major? The answer to that question is no. I know what his organizational scheme looks like. It has a military feel to it and a military look to it when you look at the actual organizational scheme to it, but it really is a little more loose than that, where you have leaders, you have assistant leaders, you have your different levels of, your intelligence, your operations, your logistics, and things like that within, and finding people to fill those positions. They've asked people, can you fill this position? They'll say, I don't have any experience in this. Well, guess what? Neither does anybody else. So you're it. You'll learn, and you learn as you go. And that's that evolution of and maturity of that process to get an organization like a Patriot Guard off the ground and get it there. It's not easy. It takes a long time to do it and to find the right people to put into those positions to make it work.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that's instant. In this particular instance, you have multiple audiences. So you have your community as an audience, you have law enforcement as an audience, you have government, your local municipal or county government is an audience. So just expanding on what Jeff said, what you're essentially doing is creating value propositions for each one of those audiences. So the value to your community, obviously, is you're going to have people gathering intel and paying attention to what's going on in your neighborhood to hopefully facilitate faster response times on the part of law enforcement. Law enforcement, you're augmenting them, right? You're the citizens auxiliary. And the same goes for the government branch. You're not costing them any more money, but you've now given them more eyes on the street and more effective situational awareness at the government and law enforcement level. So myself, my process is the same for this stuff. Okay, here's this entity that we're working with, and these are our value propositions. And hopefully we have some unique value propositions, USPs, unique selling propositions, then work backwards. How do we create those value propositions, which is where you get into the systems and you build out your model going backwards, not forward. At least for me, it's worked for me for many, many years. So at the end of the day, I think Jeff nailed it on the head when he said the general is speaking like a general. He's wicked smart. He's an absolute, treasure for America. I mean, he's a great guy. But the problem is when people get to a certain level, they become somewhat myopic. They're not seeing what's happening on the front line.
We had a saying we used to have in the Marine Corps. Actually, it was kind of a joke. Was how many Marines does it take to stand up a flagpole? You need a captain and a sergeant, and you need 3 privates. The captain tells the sergeant where he wants it. The sergeant goes to the privates and says, I want it over there. And then the privates will ask the sergeant, well, how do you want it done? He says, I don't care, just get it done.
Right on.
Well, yeah, and there's something else here too with the general. And the general, a national army is obviously very hierarchical, and it cuts broad brush, covers the entire country, sometimes even the entire world. This is going to be more. I think a citizens auxiliary is going to be much more localized, and it's going to be much more like a franchise. If you have an overall structure, and then you can basically hand that to somebody in Utah and they can kind of put it together. And then you take the same thing, you hand it to somebody in North Carolina and they can kind of put it together. But the people who are in charge in Utah are not going to be sending orders to the people in North Carolina. Everything's going to have to be local control. And it's going to, because you're working with your local police, your local sheriff. You're not going to have a national command structure that's going to, mobilize people. It's going to be on a locally case-by-case basis as needed. You might mobilize in Utah because you have a big fire situation, but you're not going to mobilize in Georgia because you don't have an issue. You may mobilize where there's rioting in Minneapolis, but if it's calm in Texas, you're not. So this idea that it's this national organization under some sort of national hierarchy really is not practical, but I think you're going to have basically franchises, local franchises.
I'll use Helene as an example of this. I know that Major Prather's Team America was involved in that. And I know the process of the planning for the mission that they were doing, which involved state team leadership. It involved people on the ground that weren't generally holding any sort of staff position within that franchise, if you will. It involved logistics. And it worked. I mean, it worked so much so that other groups out in those areas that were involved in that particular mission to get supplies out to North Carolina, they liked the plan so much that they used it for their own, and it made their mission successful also. So this is how we get there.
Yeah, there's a couple different aspects to this, right? So there's command structure, which you and Jeff just hit on. And in my opinion, this civilian auxiliary essentially reports into local authorities, and local authorities, of course, report in to the county level, and the county level reports into the state, and the state reports into the feds, is generally speaking the way it's done during emergencies. So, Jeff, I agree with your concept. This is not like a national hierarchy where, you have all these chapters reporting up through it. But on the flip side, a national organization that has a logo, a website, a charter, and all these SOPs does a bunch of things. Number one, the people who join, we onboard them and we train them in this book. These are the things that we do and don't do and how we do the things that we do. And then selling that to local politicians and local law enforcement and selling it to the community, that when you see a guardian angel with the red, cap on, you know who they are. They're good guys. They're there to help, not to hurt, sort of thing. That's my opinion.
It's like McDonald's.
Yeah.
Corporate McDonald's has the playbook. It has the recipes. This is how it's done, but they don't own very many of the stores.
That's right. Well, they
don't know how to make hamburgers anymore either.
Yeah, they don't.
Well, that's true.
Not to be contrarian, they don't own a lot of the businesses, but they own a lot of the real estate. At one point in time, McDonald's was one of the largest real estate holders in the entire world. So it's kind of like a joint venture with their franchisees, right? The franchisee owns the day-to-day operation, but they don't own the dirt it's on.
But its mission statement is to make money.
Absolutely.
It's different. Yeah.
All right. So let's go back to some parting thoughts here from the general.
Yeah, but Chris, we don't have time for that.
We don't. Not now.
The time is now.
Yes.
They've got to be organized now. We don't have time to go through a lot of
The general's pretty feisty for 85 years old, by the way.
Instruction and all that for all these people.
So here's my question for you, or my next question, I should say. You mentioned earlier how, people just don't take the initiative on these things. And as you were saying that, I'm thinking in my mind, as it relates to their safety and security, Tony Blauer said to me a couple of years ago, the problem with modern day society is that most people have outsourced their safety to somebody else. the
Yeah,
local PD, the sheriff's office, whatever the case may be. So as long as they have their bonbons and their Netflix, they're good to go. And I guess that's the really the $1 million question is how do you crack that nut and get people motivated to get off their ass? Because do you know who Mike Glover is by chance?
who?
Mike Glover.
No,
So
huh?
so Mike was a Green Beret for over 20 years. He owns Fieldcraft Survival, not too far from you, just a couple states over. He's a phenomenal human being, a spec ops soldier like yourself. And I asked him last year, we were working on a TV show together, and I said, Mike, I have a question to ask you, and tell me if I'm, in the right direction. I said to him, I said, my impression of the survival community is that they want to learn, but only if it's not a heavy lift with a sprinkling of entertainment. And he started laughing. He said, that's exactly it. But it's not just the survival community, it's America in general now, is
Yeah.
people are willing to learn, they want to learn, but it can't be a heavy lift. So I think in terms of the Patriot Guard, how do the people like you, me to a lesser extent, I don't have your skill set, but I have been a leader of many organizations. How do we get people motivated to get off their ass and actually do something? And I don't know that you have the answer. I know I don't have the answer, but how do you motivate?
There is an answer. You know, the people in your community, the red
Right?
states are pretty well off. It's the damn blue states. It's the urban areas, the cities that are going to be most affected.
Yes.
I live in the safe.
We had a couple of problems with the General's Starlink here.
State in the country. Montana applies. So we're okay in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. But it's New York City, it's Chicago, it's LA. Those are the ones that are going to suffer. And believe me, they will not be organized.
Right.
And the police won't be organized to help it. It's going to be total chaos if that happens. Total chaos in our cities. The
So not
Mid-America, Iowa, Nebraska, these things, Texas is going to be.
and this is one of the reasons I like to talk with the General
Uh,
one-on-one and not in a
uh,
group setting.
I think South Carolina, North Carolina, a lot of coastal cities, that's where the most damage is going to be. You're not going to be able to do a damn thing about it unless the military steps in and helps.
So I'm going to stop the video there and wrap up with the two of you on the topic that I raised with the General at the end there. How do you motivate people to get involved? How do you motivate people to join something like the Citizens Auxiliary?
I think with, not to sound political, but with, conservative people, it's probably not as hard. I think one of the things you're going to run into is you're going to have a lot of conservative people who are so independent. They're going to think, I can take care of me. And they have that attitude, and maybe rightfully so. But if you have a sense of community and you're in a neighborhood where you know your neighbors and everybody, that they're all friends and they all get along, it's easier to get them involved because you're going to say, okay, Bob, you're out of town. Something happens. We're going to make sure your family's okay. And if I'm out of town and something happens, I know you're going to make sure my family's okay. And you take it down to, we called it in the agency PT buff, but the benefit up front and say, you want to do this because this will help keep your family safe. This will keep your house from being looted. This will keep your neighborhood, keep it a livable place. And just say, we hope to God we never have to do it, but it's like a gun. Better to have one and not need it than not have one and need it. And also, how much heavy lifting is there going to be? I mean, you're not going to be out patrolling, 10 times a day. You're not going to be out doing PT. It's like, okay, we kind of get organized. We meet every once in a while to cover any new topics. But for the most part, so he also serves who sits and waits. And that's kind of what you're doing.
I would expect nothing less, Jeff. That was a great answer. S2, your thoughts on motivating people?
I yell at people a lot. It all depends on the situation. I've had to, I've been in organizations where I pointed out the situation where they say, well, I don't have any experience doing this. I say, well, guess what? You're going to learn. I've got a little bit of knowledge in some of these areas. I can kind of get you pointed off in the right direction, but I also have people that are experts in this area from other places that I can introduce you to, and they can mentor you. So the biggest example of this is where we keep telling everybody the whole lone wolf strategy is not going to work for you. People need to find a movie where the lone wolf has gone out and decided, I'm going to try to save the world on my own, and ends up dying. But the most classic example of where people need to come together is to go out and watch the movie Magnificent Seven.
Okay.
They had a problem in that town. They went out and they said they don't have a lot of money. What can we do? And they came in, and because the Mag 7 decided that, you know what, there's a benefit here for us that we haven't seen just yet, but we do know that the bad guys got a lot of money. So if they come into town and they decide they're going to take over this town, we kill the bad guys, then we get to go take their money. That's our benefit. That's all we ask for. And by doing that, they trained the villagers how to shoot. They trained them tactics, barriers, and all sorts of things in that movie. And they were victorious. So that's a prime example of all of this. So how do you motivate people? In this day and age, I don't think it's really about motivating people. It's finding the people that are already motivated to just get started. Because there are certain segments of our society right now that are perfectly happy being on their floaty beds with their 40-ounce big gulps, watching their little screen in front of them. They're oblivious to everything that's going on around them, and there is no amount of motivation that you're going to be able to instill in them. They're just happy being that way. It's just like the difference between, I'd hate to say Democrat and Republican, because there are some moderate Democrats out there that are thinking the world has lost its mind. But if we wanted to use that example, I'm never going to be able to convince a radical, at least from my personal experience, I'm never going to be able to convince a radical to vote for Donald Trump. Right. It's not gonna happen.
Agreed.
And I think Mark Twain said it best. You can convince some of the people some of the time, but you can't convince all of the people all of the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm typically a big picture guy when it comes to things like scalability is concerned. One of the first things I think that would have to be sourced for this type of organization would be a very charismatic leader, somebody that people gravitate towards, that they like, probably already has some level of notoriety. And so you've got a national leader who's very charismatic, number one. Number two, you offer free training at several different levels, beginner, intermediate, advanced, at no charge. So in other words, we'll teach you how to freeze dry food. We'll teach you how to shoot guns, whatever. If by signing up for this organization, it doesn't cost you anything to join this organization. And the reason I said, beginner, intermediate, advanced, I got an email this morning from a guy who's in his early 70s. And he basically said, look, I'm not as spry as I once was, but I served in the military. I was law enforcement for years, and I still have something to offer, and I would still like to help. And I think there's a lot of people, like you said, S2 out there, that they're already motivated. They just haven't got the organization to join. And I would end my thought on this, that I believe the vast majority of people want to be part of something. So when I say people want to be part of something, it could be they want to have a tight family group. They want to belong to their local church. They want to belong to a local bowling league, baseball, whatever the case may be. They want to, belong to a motorcycle club like Harley Owners Group because of the camaraderie and like-minded individuals and all that stuff. And I think you've got to essentially present this type of organization as something that you can belong to, be part of. It's not a heavy lift, but you're going to get out of it whatever you put in. It's the same as everything else in life, right? If you don't put much effort into something, you're not going to get much ROI. But I think that's how you could galvanize a small percentage. So the video got really choppy with the general. I'm not going to play the rest, but there is one last point that the general and I discussed. I'd like to get your thoughts on it as well. And this is something that's hard to quantify, but I said to him, I said, what is the percentage of Americans that we need to make this happen? And instead of answering as far as the number of Americans that we would need, he answered in terms of retired law enforcement and military. So let me just back up to give you guys context. I want to hear what you've got to say. So 1776, 3% of the colonists rise up against the King of England, and we get our independence. So the number 3% has been bandied around for years. You know, there's militia type groups that use it, et cetera, not in a bad way, by the way. So under Trump, I think, Jeff, I think we mentioned this on last night's podcast, but there was somewhere around like 3.1, 3.2 million active duty military reservists and law enforcement when Trump was in office. That number is something like 2.4 million today. So if you accept that at least half of them are good guys, meaning they're on our side, and we got 3% of Americans, which is over 12 million people, you know, you're probably talking 13, 14 million good guys against 1 or 1.5 million jackboots, brown shirts, whatever you want to call them. This shows you how fragile the system is, and the powers that be know it's fragile. You don't need F-15s. You know what I mean? With those types of numbers, 3%, the whole system would collapse. We would get rid of a tyrannical government under that hypothetical situation. I'm not promoting this. I'm just saying on the numbers. So when the general came back and he said, we need 5% of retired law enforcement and military, and we can make this happen for his Patriot Guard idea. Jeff, I'll go to you first. What kind of numbers do you think it would take to make something like this fly, actually to have a impact on the entire nation?
I don't think the numbers really have to be that high. If you're looking at a civilian auxiliary, you know, you have a city of, okay, I'll take Tucson. You got 500,000 people. I don't know how many cops they have, but if there was some calamity and you had, okay, 5,000 auxiliary, you know, civilian auxiliaries that the police were able to muster. Okay, there's going to be a lot more than there are actual police, and you're not going to find a group of bad guys big enough and strong enough to really combat that. And if you got, you know, and that's 1% of the city, 1%. If you had 1% of the city's population were somehow involved in a civilian auxiliary, you know, that would, you could, I don't want to say take control, that's the wrong word. You could maintain civility, you could maintain, you know, some sort of, you know, organize, you know, societal organization that way. It wouldn't devolve into anarchy because you would have enough people to say, okay, we have authorities on the streets. We have, okay, you know, we're not going to let you burn stuff down. We're not going to let you go, you know, rape and murder. It's not going to happen. So get that out of your mind right now. And that would be plenty, because 5,000 people in Tucson is probably 10 times the police force. You know, and you still have the police force.
Yeah.
So I think 1% would be, you know, if you had a neighborhood, if you had a town with, you know, 1,000 people, a small town, and you had 10 take charge guys, you know, who's gonna, you know, challenge them? You know, who's going to say, yeah, screw you, I'm going to burn your house down? No, you're not. And they'd hit the point of diminishing returns really, really fast.
I'm just thinking here, Volusia County, Florida, not the largest county in the state by a long shot. I think last time we had the census, it was maybe 580,000 people in Volusia County. So 1% of that would be 5,800 individuals. And when you think of it in those terms, if we had all the local PDs that we had, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office, I don't even think you need 1%, right? I think you know, if you even had 1,000 people, so 0.2%, that would be a pretty big force to contend with from a law and order perspective. Like that would really augment, which was the general's word, it would really augment the local authorities. If you had 1,000 volunteers show up that have some level of training, how to de-escalate situations, how to take intel, record it, pass it up the food chain. And it's funny, just as I'm saying this, and you guys can tell me what your thoughts are, it almost seems to me like this is very similar to Doc Pete's remnant ministry. So the remnant ministry started with the doc going down to the Texas-Mexico border by himself with one horse and his dog, which is a service dog. And as he saw things unfold, he would relay that intel, pardon me, back to the Texas DPS, Department of Public Safety. And now when the doc goes down to the border, it's not the doc by himself. It's a group of guys go down to the border on horseback or side by side or four-wheeler with their dogs. They see the drones come over, they drop fentanyl, they call the coordinates into DPS. They see the drones coming across because they're not sending a lot of these illegals with coyotes, a person leading them anymore. They just say, follow that drone will take you to where you need to be, sort of thing. So all that intel gets relayed back. So there's no opportunity or desire, or I'm not sure what the right word is, but Doc Pete's guys aren't getting hands-on involved in an altercation with these people breaking the law. They're just providing eyes and ears to relay that information back. Seems like this civilian auxiliary idea, very similar to that as far as the way you put it together, to be, like you said, do the light duty stuff, let them do the heavy duty stuff, but give them eyes everywhere.
Yeah.
And potentially, like I said, you have some de-escalation training, which Tony Blauer's an expert at. So S2, I want to hear your thoughts on this, as far as, what the model would potentially look like, getting people.
Yeah, I keep trying to hold these thoughts in my head.
Hey,
I keep going back to
dead tree format, and a pen is great for that when you get to be.
Yeah, I've got a pad and pencil sitting here. I've been writing down stuff, and as Jeff was commenting on the last thing that I didn't forget, I forgot what my thought was on that. But as far as this thing that General is proposing, I think the view of this being a defense only organization is a siloed view, and here's why. Just like the 70-year-old guy that you said wrote into you, everybody has something to offer. And this is the pitch that I talk to everybody about for any organization that they're going to be part of. Okay. So if we go back to 1776, how did those guys survive to be able to continue to fight? What was the things that they needed? They needed somebody to give them food. They needed somebody to be able to cook that food. They needed somebody to be able to give them clothing, materials for making ammunition, things of that nature. So everybody has something that they can offer within these organizations, be it man, woman, child. Somebody has communication skills. Helene is a primary example. We had ham radio operators out there that were operating, getting people in and out. So the idea that this is a defense-only organization, which is the way it sounds, I don't think that's what the general's proposing here. I think the reason the general said what he said goes right back to the Mag 7. The X category of people are the trainers that train the trainers. And they carry this information back to their individual communities, their individual groups, to where everybody becomes a part of this franchise, as Jeff calls it, and they become an effective unit.
So what the general is proposing, I've spoke to him more than just this one conversation, is essentially a militia, and he's avoiding the word militia on purpose because of the negative connotations that you've both raised. But that's his vision for the Patriot Guard, is to become a militia that augments local law enforcement. And our conversation may have gone a little bit differently here today, but I think selling the idea of a militia to even the most conservative sheriff out there is going to raise some eyebrows and probably not be warmly received. Which is why I like Jeff's verbiage for civilian auxiliary, and I agree with you. There's a bazillion things that an auxiliary can do, but I don't think that in this current environment, regardless of what the attitude of the sheriff is, that I don't think you'd have very good odds going to any sheriff and saying, "Hey, how you doing? We're the local militia. We're here to help." I don't think that's
but the militia were not just a bunch of guys running around out in the woods with guns.
No, but we're back
That's
to
the
what
point
Jeff
that
stated at the CIA, perception is reality. And the perception today of the word militia is armed rednecks that are anti-establishment. That it is
so
what it is.
I understand the
Remember,
perception.
gay used to mean happy.
Yeah, I understand. I understand the perception of it, but in concept of it, whether by any name that you want to decide you want to call it, the militia was not just a bunch of guys running around in the woods shooting at redcoats.
I don't
They
disagree.
had men, women, children that had their parts in that formation of those groups, if you will. They all had their roles to play. So, in limiting this to men per se, not a good idea. And
No,
limiting this to, yeah, but the concept of the civilian guard or state guard or patriot guard, like I said, by any name you want to call it, it needs to be all inclusive of everybody in those communities so that they understand what their roles are. And that's what I think really the point of a patriot guard or a militia or, like I said, whatever name you want to call it. We're Mag 7. We're not Rambos.
Yeah, I mean, you can say, look, I don't know how to shoot a gun. I don't want to shoot a gun. I'm morally opposed to shooting guns. Good, you can be the comms guy. You're on the radio. You're relaying, messages to people and collecting data. There's lots of things you can do without,
Yep. Yep.
being in the line of fire.
I agree, and S2, like your concept of this auxiliary having, all walks of life being involved is a good concept, and I like that. So I'm not trying to discount women at all here. These are just words that immediately came to mind. Is that I perceive this organization, if it's going to be successful, to kind of be like the Man Scouts of America. Not the Boy Scouts, the Man Scouts. and man meaning human, meaning women are included. I'm not excluding women at all, but
Yeah.
but think of it in
Adult
terms.
Scouting of America.
There you go. Point being is it addresses all of S2's points that he just made, valid points. It's got this national feeling to it, but in reality, those troops, those scout troops,
They're all local.
they're local. They're local.
Gives a whole idea. It gives a whole new meaning to adulting.
There you go. And you get badges when you accomplish stuff. People love
Do merit badges.
People love badges, just saying. So I'm going to confess to this on screen. So I screwed up and forgot to do the conflicted question at the beginning of this video. However, we're doing this video backwards, and after Jeff and S2 leave, I'm going to actually record the opening to this video, and I will read the conflicted question to you in the audience at the beginning, and so that when we get to this stage, Jeff and S2 and I can answer it. So here we go with the conflicted question of the day, kind of all ass backward here. All right, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela declared war against the United States due to the death of the dollar, which led to a complete collapse of the global monetary system. They blame the U.S. government for ruining the global financial markets and are using propaganda to get the support of their own people. Your country's president has gone on TV and declared that there are rough times ahead and that all citizens need to prepare for World War III. And I kind of agree with the general or the major last night. We're probably like World War V or at least World War IV. What would you do after hearing your leader say those words? So basically prepare for World War. What would you do after hearing that, Jeff?
Well, I'd make sure I was as far away from a potential nuclear target as I could get. And you don't know, is it going to be a nuclear war? Is it going to be a conventional war? If it's conventional, it's probably going to be fought more at sea than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
The only one of those listed on this hemisphere is Venezuela, and they're not going to invade anything. They're pretty much useless. They couldn't take Texas. If it's nuclear, a whole different thing. And if it goes full scale, there's probably not much anybody can do. You might be looking at nuclear winter and and everybody dead. But if it is conventional and they even decide that they want to be stupid enough to invade this country, I would prepare like it would anything else. I'd find a defendable location, I would stockpile, food, water, medicines, guns, and ammunition, and then organize with my neighbors to say, if somebody starts rolling in here who ain't an American, we may have to, we'll take matters into our own hands. There's no way in hell I'd just sit back and let some Russian or Chinese just walk
Right.
in.
Yeah. S2.
So Russia, China, and Iran are looking for alternatives to the US dollar already by forming BRICS. So they're
Yeah.
kind of out of the picture at that point. I don't care about them. The other ones, what would I do? I'd start a Patriot Guard.
Fair enough. Yeah. Or at the very least, like a mutual assistance group, right?
Nope, I'd start a Patriot Guard.
You know what I'm saying. All right. So obviously everybody has a different situation here. For Cindy and I, we would immediately pack up and head for our cabin. Our cabin is in the middle of nowhere. It's at the end of a private road, at the end of a private driveway with a gate on it, at the end of the road at the top of the mountain. And it's pretty steep on either side of us. I don't know if you've seen any of my training videos when we're there, but generally speaking, you guys know, like if you take a picture of something with your iPhone, it doesn't do justice to how steep something is, doesn't do justice to how high a mountain is, that sort of thing. And when you've got a slope like this and you're trying to run up and down that hill and shoot guns and stuff, it's an ass kicker. So we would be heading to the cabin, end of story. That's what we would do.
Yeah, but you got that asshole neighbor out there with you.
Yeah, and I'm not saying anything on camera with regards to that. So what I will say is, in typical Survival Dispatch news fashion, we end an episode with our suggestions on what people can do. At this particular point in time, I only had one recommendation from Survival Dispatch for our audience with regards to the Patriot Guard, Citizens Auxiliary, whatever the case may be, is to just start discussions on this topic with your circle and stay tuned into Survival Dispatch, because I have a feeling we're going to have more information on this. I've got a bunch of ideas rattling around up here. But other than that, I think at this point in time, the job for our audience would maybe think through the process of what it would take to do a civilian auxiliary, a Patriot Guard, whatever you want to call it, and what it might look like. And you know what? This is how things start, just by having conversations. Next thing you know, somebody says, you know what? I'm going to do that. And at that point, things can potentially catch fire. So that's it. Want to mention patreon.com/survival dispatch to become an insider, $9.99 a month. You get behind the scenes footage. You get the briefs for these episodes in advance. Sometimes you get episodes in advance, and you get our 228-page essentials guide absolutely for free. We have free memberships as well. You don't get all of those bonuses, but for $9.99, there's a ton of value attached to that. Please mash the like button before you leave, and please like, share, comment, subscribe, and God bless America.
Hoorah.
Feels like 2008 all over again. The best way to protect your savings is with gold and silver. As the national debt soars past $34 trillion and the banking system wobbles, your financial well-being could be at risk. Precious metals like gold and silver hedge against inflation and dollar devaluation. They're perfect for diversifying your portfolio. With Goldco, it's easy. Get first-class service, step-by-step guidance, and a free wealth protection kit. In just 3 simple steps, you can roll over your 401k or IRA into precious metals, tax and penalty free. Todd Callender and I chose Goldco because they stand out with over 6,000 5-star ratings, an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, and a highest buyback price guarantee. Don't wait. Secure your financial future. Visit survival.gold or click the link below to get your free 2024 Wealth Protection Kit. Government agencies have been weaponized against us. The Secret Service reacts too late. The FBI manufactures cases. The ATF targets our firearms, and the FDA screws us to drive big pharma profits. We must support Trump, who literally took a bullet for us, and back independent media like Survival Dispatch News. Now they're aiming to make Black Forest NMN a regulated anti-aging product to drive more profits for big pharma. NMN is the only over-the-counter supplement I've taken that's noticeably increased my energy levels, allowing me to work extreme hours. I've taken almost every OTC supplement over the past 42 years that I've been training, many of them as a world champion powerlifter. Get your NMN before it's too late. Buy two, get one free. Click the link below. Stay alert, stay strong, and stay safe.